Hello again. So now I want to show you how to make simple deductions within our natural deduction system using the first four rules of inference I told you about. So suppose you have, I'm going to give you an example in English, how to use this method using full English sentences. And then I'm going to give you a formal example, how to do it in our formal system using our formal language, which is just pure structure. So you just see the structures involved. So first example in English. So suppose I have this information. Suppose I know that if Gord is giddy, then Donna is drunk. And I know that if Donna is drunk, then Chuck is churlish. But I know that Chuck is not churlish. And I also know that either Gord is giddy, either that's the case, or if Betty is brilliant, then Henry is hip and Mary is miffed. And I also happen to know that Betty is brilliant. So I've got this information, and suppose what I want to prove from that, deduce from that, I want to see if on the basis of this information I can prove that this also is true, this conjunction, that Henry is hip and Mary is miffed. Okay, so I want to prove that. So what I do is I take this information, I make a numbered list of the information I have, the premises I have to work with. So I make this numbered list. And then what I do is I make a series of inferences using the rules of inference I have. So I make sure that each inference I make is valid until I end up deducing from these premises this conclusion. Okay? So now I'm looking at the information I have so far. Notice the first two premises. I have if Gord is giddy, then Donna is drunk. And I have if Donna is drunk, then Chuck is churlish. Well, notice I have two conditionals. And the consequent of the one is the same as the antecedent of the other. So I notice that these two statements fit the pattern of hypothetical syllogism, right? Two conditionals, consequent of one is the same as the antecedent of the other. So from those two conditionals, I can infer the conditional that starts with this antecedent and ends with this consequent. So I get this. So I get if Gord is giddy, then Chuck is churlish. So I inferred this next statement. I add another number. I'm just making a numbered list of these statements. So I infer number 6, statement 6, this one here, from these two earlier statements, and I indicate this by writing the numbers of the earlier lines I'm inferring this one from, and I indicate what rule of inference I'm using. I'm using HS, hypothetical syllogism. So this justifies why I was able to write this new sentence down. Okay? Okay, well, what can I do now? I've got if Gord is giddy, then Chuck is churlish. But notice here, I know that Chuck is not churlish. Well, this fits another one of our inference patterns. I've got a conditional, and I've got the negation of the consequent of that conditional. From those two things, I can infer the negation of the antecedent using modus tollens. So I get Gord is not giddy. So I've got the conditional, negation of the consequent. I get the negation of the antecedent. Gord is not giddy. And again, I justify this, why I can infer this, by saying, well, I'm inferring it from lines 3 and 6, and I'm using the rule modus tollens. Okay, so this justifies my being able to conclude this from what I've got so far. Well, what can I do now? Notice that line 4 is a disjunction. It's either Gord is giddy or, and then the rest of the statement, okay? But or is the main connective in this sentence. So, and then I notice I've got the negation here of this first disjunct, of this disjunction. So that fits another one of the patterns that we've learned, It fits disjunctive syllogism, right? I have disjunction, I have the negation of the first disjunct. From that, I can get the other disjunct, which is all the rest of the sentence. So I get this, just copying the rest of the sentence, the second disjunct here. And this is what I get. If Betty is brilliant, then Henry is hip and Mary is miffed. Okay, and I have inferred it from statements 4 and 7, and I've used the rule disjunctive syllogism. So this justifies, that I now know that this is true too, given the information I began with. Well, let's see. What can I do here? Well, notice that this number 8 is a conditional. It's an if-then sentence. If Betty is brilliant, then this other stuff here. But notice that I have the information that Betty is brilliant as a separate statement here. So that fits another one of our inference patterns, modus ponens, right? I have a conditional, and I have the antecedent of that conditional by itself. So from those two things, I can infer the consequent of the conditional. So I get what comes after the then there. Henry is hip and Mary is miffed. Okay? So, and I inferred that from statements 5 and 8, and I used the rule modus ponens to get this conjunction here. Okay? But now notice that was what I was trying to prove, right? This is the conclusion I was trying to deduce, and I managed to deduce it. Okay, so I made a series of valid inferences, and I know they're valid because they follow these rules of inference that are proven valid, and I've ended up with a conclusion, and that tells me that this conclusion does in fact deductively follow from these premises, because I was able to deduce them from those premises using valid rules of inference. And I know that validity is transitive, so if I make a series of valid inferences, what I get at the end really does follow from what I started out with at the beginning. Okay. So, this is what it looks like in our formal system. This is the same argument. Okay, it's just translated into our formal language, right? So I'm just using capital letters to stand for complete sentences, okay, the sub-sentences of these various sentences. And so capital letters and connected, horseshoe, tilde, wedge, dot to stand for and, or, if then, okay. So I've just translated the sub-sentences in the earlier argument with capital letters, and then I've translated the connectives using these symbols. Okay, so now this just displays the pure structure of that argument I was working with in English. Now I can make this exactly the same induction or deduction, following the same rules of inference and just sticking with my formal language. So notice I have two conditionals here: if G then D, if G then C. Well, but hypothetical syllogism gets me if G then C. Okay, so I've got that. I get if G then C, G horseshoe C, from statements 1 and 2 by hypothetical syllogism. Okay, now I've got this conditional, but I notice I have the negation of the consequent of that conditional here. So from that I can get the negation of the antecedent, which is not G, using my rule modus tollens. So I inferred that from 3 and 6 by modus tollens. So that justifies this inference. Now I've got not G. Notice here, this is really much easier to see this structure in our formal language than in English. But this is the structure of that English sentence. Okay, and you notice the main operator is the wedge, and I have the negation of the first disjunct, so I get the other disjunct using disjunctive syllogism. So that gives me this. Okay, just take what comes after the wedge there, copy it down here. I infer that from 4 and 7 by the rule of disjunctive syllogism. And now notice I've got a conditional again. If B, then H and M. This is the horseshoe is the main operator. I have B by itself here. So now I can apply modus ponens to infer the consequent of the conditional, which is H and M. So that gives me H and M from 5 and 8 by the rule modus ponens. And that's the conclusion I was supposed to prove. So I'm done with my proof. I've started with these premises to begin with. I've been given. And from those premises, I've deduced this conclusion using these valid rules of inference. So I know that this statement form, H and M, follows from these statement forms. Okay, so I'm done with my proof. In the next video, I'll teach you 4 more rules of inference, and then I'll go on to show you how to this kind of strategies to use to prove to make more complex, more difficult deductions.